everyone, what's up? My name is Joss and welcome back to my channel squibblesreads. So I've never actually done one of these videos on my channel before, but today I'm going to be recommending you some books based on more commonly known books that you may have read before. So basically, if you like that book, then you might like this book. I have seen these videos floating around BookTube, but the first place that I saw them was from a series that Cece over at Problems of a Book Nerd did. In this video, I will be explaining why I think you might like this book and what some similarities might be, but obviously they are different books, so obviously there are some differences there as well. Also, I just wanted to say a quick thank you for all the thoughtful and supportive comments that I got on my last video, where I basically just sat down and vented a whole bunch and talked about some of my frustrations that I have had for a little while in the BookTube community, so thank you. And without any further ado, why don't we just get into some book recommendations. My first recommendation is based on The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. This is basically about a boy whose name is Monty. He is going to take over his family's estate, but before he does that, he goes off on like this romp of Europe, basically just traveling, having a good time, drinking, having fun, consensual sexual relationships. What I loved about this book is basically the relationship between Monty and Percy, who are two teenage boys, and the way that both of these characters were presented. The book is also extremely sex positive, and during this time, Percy's skin color and his culture affects the way that other people treat him in society, which is very unfortunate, but the book does elaborate a little bit about that and how it affects his relationship with Monty. There's also an adventure part to the plot, which I liked less than the romance, but it is definitely still there, and that is part of why I am choosing the book that I am recommending. So if you liked The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee, then you might also like An Unseen Attraction by KJ Charles. This was one of my favorite books that I read in the month of October. To start off, they are both set in 18th century Europe. Monty does originate from England, but like I said, he does go on a big traveling journey, and The Unseen Attraction is set only in England. The Unseen Attraction is basically a blend of romance and mystery. The romance is between our two main characters. They are both men, named Clem and Rolly. And throughout the course of the book, we see their very slow burn romance building. I will say that An Unseen Attraction is more sexually explicit. There are sex scenes in this book, but Clem and Rolly's romance reminded me a lot of Monty and Percy. Clem is also part Indian, so again in this book it explains how his skin color and his culture affect how other people treat him. Where I think An Unseen Attraction stands out is in its mystery. It really keeps the drive behind the plot moving a lot, and it really compelled me to finish that book, whereas the adventure part in The Gentleman's Guide I could do with or without. The relationship was really the crux of the book. Clem also experiences some anxiety, and in the same way that Monty becomes aware of his privilege through the way that he sees other people treat Percy, Rolly becomes aware of Clem's relationship with his anxiety through the outings that they take together and how Clem experiences different things. And Rolly treats Clem with so much care and so much respect, and you kind of see his little light bulb go off, which I think is so cool. And they're definitely one of my favorite couples ever. My second recommendation is based on one of my favorite books of the year, Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. We are in the suburbs of Shaker Heights, Ohio, and it focuses on this one family who is pretty well-to-do. They have 4 kids that are middle to high school age, and this well-to-do family is renting a place to a single mom who is an artist and her daughter. The daughter hangs out with the high school kids. There is also a custody battle in the community for a Chinese baby girl, and surrounding this custody battle there are issues about race, about privilege, and about how to provide for a child that is of a different culture than you. This book is phenomenally written. It also has a little bit of drive behind the plot compared to Celeste Ng's previous novel. It explores things like motherhood, about expectations of women and mothers in society, the way that single moms are viewed, especially ones that have self-employed jobs in the arts. Celeste Ng writes issues of identity and privilege beautifully, just as in her first book. So if you liked Little Fires Everywhere, you may also like Lucky Boy by Shanti Sekaran. This is a book about an 18-year-old girl. At the beginning of the book, her name is Solimar Castro Valdez. She is originally from Mexico, but she has just crossed the border into the States, into Northern California, where she ends up on her cousin's doorstep and she is pregnant. We also meet Kavya Reddy and her husband Rishi. Kavya is in her 30s. She is a chef at a sorority house in UC Berkeley. She and her husband are really wanting to have a baby, but they are having a hard time with conception, and somehow Solimar's baby ends up in the care of Kavya and her husband. This is another story that explores things like identity, privilege, culture, motherhood, the expectations of women in society. The writing, I think, is equally beautiful. It's just another voice, another author, and like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said, many more stories about identity are extremely important. In my favorite TED Talk of all time, The Danger of a Single Story. But anyways, my next recommendation is not based on a book, but it is actually based on the Disney movie Coco. It probably comes as no surprise that Coco is absolutely my favorite movie of the year because it has beautiful imagery, but it also has rich, nuanced details from the Mexican culture and portrayal of the Mexican culture. It surrounds themes like family, music, imagery, self-confidence, the way that children and families deal with life and death matters together, and because of all of those things, I'm going to recommend the book Echo by Pam Munoz Ryan. I'm sure that the physical book of Echo is great, but I highly, highly recommend, actually I implore you to listen to the audiobook instead of the physical book because, like I said, there is a huge focus on music. But before I get too ahead of myself, I just read this book, so I will review it in a forthcoming wrap-up. It kind of like spanned the weird like November to December gap, so I'm not sure what month I'll review it in. Whatever, who actually cares? But anyways, the book opens in kind of like a fairy tale setting, and we have a boy whose name is Otto, and he's lost in the woods, and he meets these 3 witches, and the witches tell him that there is this prophecy on his life, and it's all tied to this magical harmonica. And then we flash forward to about the late 1930s, early 1940s, around the time of World War II, and we have 3 separate storylines. We start with Friedrich. He lives in Germany, and in World War II, the Germany was undergoing the Holocaust times. There was persecution of Jews, all of those things. And then we have a second storyline, and our character there, his name is Mike, and we learn more about the Japanese internment camps there. And then our third character, Ivy, she lives in California, and during that time in California, I had no idea about this going into the books, but they had actually segregated Mexican students, and they went to schools where there were only Latinx students attending those schools. So throughout all of these 3 stories, there is the theme of a harmonica and the way that kids and adults and everyone in society plays music on a harmonica. And it is an extremely simple instrument because all you need is your mouth, your hands, and a harmonica. And the other theme that connects these stories is the theme of injustice. So those themes are also things that I mentioned when I was talking about Coco. On the audiobook, there is someone singing, there is someone playing the harmonica, the piano, the cello, the violin. There are all these different instruments that are mentioned in each part of the book. There is also a separate piece of music that is extremely important and played by different people from each thread of the book. So each separate character has one piece of music that serves as their motif. It's just so wonderfully crafted, and then all of these pieces of music and all of their stories kind of come together to talk about one idea at the very end of this book, and then the instruments come together. It's just gorgeous, and there is no other way to consume this book besides an audiobook. I think that if you liked Coco, it's also just really like emotionally powerful. So if you liked how emotionally powerful Coco is, you will also like how emotionally powerful Echo is. My next recommendation is based on The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is a book about a group of 6 students who attend a prestigious university in Vermont. There is a murder that happens at the very beginning of the book, and then the story will take on from there. A lot of the plot does revolve around the murder, but there is also some talk about how these students fit in at the school, their kind of role or trope that they have at the school, and how their relationship is with this one particular professor. Behind the plot, there is a whole bunch of manipulation, there is social status, there are different social circles and elitism amongst their friends and in this circle of 6 people. So knowing all those things, if you liked The Secret History, you may also like a book called Everything Belongs to Us by Eugen Grace-Wertz. I read this book about 3 months ago. It is set in Korea, and when the book opens, we are in the middle of this protest where all of the people that are activists in the protest are women, and they are protesting poor working conditions in the factories that they work in. So long hours, really like no food, and like really cold, all these different deplorable factory conditions. And then this one boy that is trying to fit into a social circle at the university that he attends, which is also a very prestigious university, is dared to do something during the course of that protest. And because of the thing that he does, it sets off this huge chain of events, and it all revolves around the fact that he wants to fit in with his like older, like his big siblings in the social circle at the university. Something that you do get in Everything Belongs to Us that you get less of in The Secret History is we get a lot of the political and the historical climate during this time in Korea, and we get more of like an activist slash protest stance because it does open during the middle of this protest. But the things that they have in common are the university setting. There's talk about social social circles where we fit in, elitism, and because this boy wants to fit in so badly, he does things to manipulate other people, using other people as vehicles of manipulation for his relationships and friendships, and whether they are actually genuine or whether they're surrounded by secrets and the ways that people manipulate others. We can also kind of compare and contrast how the female characters are treated in both of the books with regards to social standing, socioeconomic status, things like that. It's a really interesting compare and contrast, but I genuinely think that the university setting really surrounds both of these things and informs the plot and where both of them are going. My next recommendation is based on Paperweight by Meg Haston, which is a YA book that was kind of popular a few years ago. This is based on our protagonist, Stevie. She's a teenage girl. She's been diagnosed with anorexia nervosa following the death of her brother. Her father then sends her to a eating disorder rehab facility to hopefully move towards wellness, and this book documents her journey there. At the beginning of the book, she is extremely angry. She's very upset. She experiences some suicidal thoughts, so definitely content warning for eating disorders and suicidal thoughts and depression. I did think this was an incredibly honest and authentic portrayal of Stevie's experience at this eating disorder rehab facility. So I think that if you liked Paperweight, you would also like What I Lost by Alexandra Ballard, which I also read recently. Our protagonist in this book is called Elizabeth, and she is also recently diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, and she is sent to an eating disorder rehab facility called Wallingfield. And at Wallingfield, we see her journey there. I think that compared to Stevie's journey in Paperweight, hers is a little bit less dark, but it is no less serious and no less deep-seated in issues from her past. So we see her go through individual therapy, group therapy, routines with the meals and weighing that she has to deal with. Paperweight definitely has less levity than What I Lost, but I think both are equally important and poignant stories, so I think that if you would like one, you would definitely like the other. My last recommendation is based on the book Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh, which I believe was nominated for the Man Booker Prize not this year, but the year before. This is basically a very dark case study about Eileen, who is kind of your typical like offbeat dark woman protagonist. And she has a job working as a prison guard at a boys' prison. She also has to care for her father, who has a deep, deep struggle with alcohol and alcohol abuse. She's also exploring her relationship with this new woman that starts working at the prison. Her name is Rebecca, and she finds Rebecca extremely attractive, and she's very sexually attracted to Rebecca. However, she has struggles with social skills. She doesn't socialize a lot. She doesn't get out a lot. So she has these very grotesque thoughts about people's bodies, the way they look, their bodily functions. She's unhappy with her body, but at the same time, on the outside, when she's narrating, she kind of seems complacent as well. There are some kind of icky, gory descriptions of people's like bodily secretions that aren't the most fun to read, but they're definitely extremely authentic to Eileen's own experience. There is also another aspect of the plot that involves a mystery element, and I think it is pitted more as a thriller, but I had an issue with the way that this was marketed, so I was expecting a little bit more fast-moving in the general sense of like a typical thriller, but it was not that. It was more like a dark case study of some lady that has some kind of weird thoughts about other people's bodies. So in a way, I liked Eileen for what it was. However, I was a little bit disappointed in it. I just wanted a little bit more. But I think that if you liked and you were disappointed in Eileen, but you kind of like those same elements, I would highly recommend my favorite book of the year, well, what is probably going to be my favorite book of the year, which is called Sorry to Disrupt the Peace by Patty Yumi Cottrell. So this is about our 32-year-old protagonist. Her name is Helen Moran. She lives in a town, and at the onset of the book, she is waiting for the delivery of a couch from IKEA to her apartment where she shares with her roommate. And when she's waiting for this couch, she gets a call that very unfortunately tells her that her brother has died by suicide, and both Helen and her brother have been adopted from Korea by her parents that are extremely involved with their church. They're highly religious, and they base their stinginess and penny pinching they justified because of their religious beliefs. I have no idea whether those two are actually connected, but that's how they connect them in their life. Helen decides to kind of pack up and go back to her hometown and her house in Milwaukee where her parents are to kind of investigate and discover how her brother has died and kind of the backstory of all of that. And through the unfolding of that, we also see some aspects of her own life that come up when she is exploring her brother's suicide. This book is what I needed Eileen to be. So we basically see every single little thought inside of Helen's head. Helen also works as a social worker for underprivileged youth. So in her job, as well as in Eileen's job, they both involve some sense of empathy because it's a helping position. There is a point in the book where she is undergoing her investigation and talking to different people about her brother's suicide, where she kind of subconsciously realizes that the amount of energy that it takes for her to exert the empathy and the mental fortitude that she does at her job working with these youth and dealing with all the people at her workplace trying to tell her what to do with these youth, it's really, really draining on her emotionally. And I think that there is a turning point in the book where you can kind of see it hit her in a way. And the beauty of this book is in the writing, because the writing portrays that she knows that something is hitting her inside of her, that it's getting to her, but she can't really tell why. It's just this feeling of being drained and devoid of just any more mental and emotional fortitude. And I think that that is so beautiful because it's not an explicit realization, it's just something so visceral and something that you can't put into words, but somehow this author has done it, and I can't explain how or why. It's just beautiful. There are also points in this book where Helen is also exploring her sexuality, just like Eileen did with Rebecca. So she wonders about people's bodies, she wonders about her own body, what she finds attractive and arousing. She starts to explore her sexuality. She doesn't really know what word defines her sexuality, but she realizes that the beauty of this kind of exploration is that you don't always have to know, and that even though other people are uncomfortable with you not knowing, it's fine to be in a place where you are a little bit uncomfortable and not know. You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You see, I'm already like struggling to explain it, but that's the perfect way to explain it, is getting comfortable with discomfort. In this sort of wonderfully, lavishly written way, Patty Yumi Cottrell also dispels some of the myths that people have around suicide. For example, the myth that if you ask someone directly about suicide or killing themselves, if it would push them to go ahead and do so, and that is actually not the case all the time. It usually will open up more direct conversation, not create shame and stigma around it, which happens so commonly. There is a ton of shame and stigma about talking about some of these really deep, visceral, uncomfortable feelings, and it dispels that myth really beautifully. Sorry to Disrupt the Peace is slightly more plot focused. It does drive a little bit harder with the brother's suicide and her trying to explore it. It's a little bit messier, I guess, with that part of it, whereas the other one, it was kind of just flat and straightforward, but this one is just kind of all sorts of nicely jumbled up. So I think that was great. I also think the case study part of it was just perfected, but perfected in its messiness. I can't explain it any more than that, but just trust me, I highly, highly recommend this book, especially if you wanted a little bit more from Eileen. So that is it for this video. If you guys like this kind of video, definitely let me know, because I have a few other of these recommendations kind of up my sleeve of similar books, so if you like that, you'll like this kind of thing. Also, if you've seen Coco, let me know down in the comments. I just really want to talk to more people about Coco, so let me know if you've seen it and what you thought. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!